Okay, so today our message is I am free out of Romans 6 and 7. So everyone say, I am free.
I am free.
Okay, good, that's the title. All right, so last week we talked about being dead to sin and alive to God, right? So I have the two vases of water up here. And this one represented Adam. And through Adam's one sin, like the blue drop of food coloring, that the whole, all of humanity experienced sin. But then through the second Adam, through Jesus, when he came, his one act of sacrifice to die for us meant life for all of us if we believe in him. So that was the concept from last week. And then I have my little Lego figure that what actually happens when you're on the cross, or when Jesus is on the cross. We go from being dead to this, to dying with him. And when he dies, I die. And when he comes back to life, I have a new life as well. That was the concept from last week. So, but I want to go back and redefine something for you that I didn't do last week. And it's really important. And a couple of you guys mentioned it in your discussions. So I want to go back and redefine a very important word. And that word is sin. So I want you to close your eyes. Okay, smile. Okay, close your eyes. Don't fall asleep. Close your eyes. And when I say the word sin, what image comes to mind? Okay, what image comes to mind? When I say the word sin, what colors come to mind? And when I say the word sin, what feelings come to mind? Okay, so open your eyes, look back up. Okay, stretch, shake it out. Okay, so what kinds of thoughts came to mind? What kinds of images came to mind? What kinds of colors came to mind? What kind of feelings came to mind? Who had really bright, happy colors come to mind? Okay, who had darker colors, didn't look very bright colors? Okay. Images could be across the board. I mean, you could have seen different things. What kind of feelings came to mind? Was it a happy feeling that came to mind? No. Okay. So nowadays, that word sin is a super loaded word. In our culture, in our society, we've taken a really important biblical concept and our world has made it something different. It means something different. I remember when I was 10 years old or something, we, at my Costco in Phoenix when I was growing up. So who remembers Costco before it was Costco? It was called Price Club. Okay, no one knows that. But Costco back in the day, so this is Phoenix, I was growing up there, and I remember this really sweet old harabaji grandpa guy who worked in the food court. And I remember I was probably 4th or 5th grade. And you know how they have their name tags, at Costco? So this really sweet guy who gave us our pizza, his name was Gaylord. And I remember thinking as a 10-year-old, dude, that's why would you ever name your kid that? Because that means you're gay. That was what I was in 4th grade. And probably way back when he was born, gay didn't mean homosexual. It meant happy. Okay, so when this really old harabaji was born, which is probably a long time ago, and I don't even know if he's around anymore because that was a long time ago, but our words have changed, right? The meanings of our words have changed over time. So has the word sin. That word has changed over time, what society thinks and feels about that word. So a lot of people attach sin with religion and all these things, and I want to reframe that for you. Okay, so instead of thinking about the word sin, you can think of the word evil or darkness. Even with non-Christians, when you ask them about darkness or light, they understand that concept. Or brokenness. Okay, when I talk about evil, darkness, or brokenness, I'm talking about sin in the Bible. Okay, not sin as the world defines it. So what exactly is sin in the Bible? There's two things that I want you to really understand that's really important. There's sin as state and sin as action. Most of us, when you pictured something in your head just now, you probably thought of sin as action. like killing someone, hurting someone, stealing. Those are things called sin as action. That's like sin that you do, but that's not all that sin is. Now, the most important thing is actually sin as state. Now, can I have the slide go up? So the other week, my son was doing we were doing this preschool at home curriculum, and there was nursery rhymes, and one of them was Humpty Dumpty. But I thought about it, and actually Humpty Dumpty is very applicable for my illustration. So do you guys know Humpty Dumpty? Maybe? Okay. So how does it go? What is Humpty Dumpty anyway? What is he? He's an egg. Okay. Not hard-boiled, raw. Makes a big difference. So Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. Okay, that is the perfect illustration of sin as state. Okay, when Adam fell, he fell, right? He fell and he was broken. And no matter what anyone could do, nobody could ever put Adam back together again. That's the same thing for us. We are born broken. Have you ever tried to put a raw, broken egg back together? It's impossible. Okay, you can't. Once you break that shell, it's broken. The only way for that broken egg to be made back together is if whoever created the egg miraculously found a way to put it back together. Okay? No matter what you and I do, we could never be put back together again. In the world, okay, in Christianity, it talks about total depravity as sin. Now, that doesn't mean you're totally depraved. Nick is so depraved he can't do anything right. That's not what total depravity means. Total depravity means the idea of every part of us is in brokenness. So not just your spiritual self, but your mind, your body, every part of you is saturated with that brokenness. So when people talk about things oh, that's genetic, that tendency to have alcoholism in your family, that's genetic, or that different things like that. People talk about domestic violence and how that's genetic. Actually, all of that is true. Nowadays, there's research talking about when people have trauma happen to them, it literally changes your cellular level. It changes your genes. And so you can pass that along. There is research about that nowadays. But to me, that just shows me total depravity. That's totally true. That makes sense. When sin entered the world, it affected every single area of our lives and our bodies and our world. And so when you talk about broken genes or even birth defects, my son was born with a birth defect. A really serious birth defect that he had to have 4 surgeries for in the first 14 months of his life. And I remember thinking God, how could you do a birth defect? That doesn't make sense to me. Why would you create someone with a birth defect? And the more I prayed and read and talked to people about it, it was the idea of total depravity. Sin has influenced every single area of our lives. Because when you trace back his birth defect, their only reason for it is that something in my genes, his genes, when they came together, something was off. It didn't y'all know DNA, right? Okay, biology. Okay, something didn't go right. Do I want that to happen? No. But that is also evidence of total depravity, of sin influencing every part of our lives. Is that something that my husband and I or my son did wrong? No. So there is sin as suffering that we see that we didn't do wrong. If someone does something super traumatic against you, is that your sin? Is that your fault? No. But we all face the consequences of that, suffering from that. So there's sin that you actually can commit, but there's sin that is a result of our broken state, of Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and we can't put him back together again. Our whole creation, our whole world is broken. So we have to expand what that looks like. Sin is not just, oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. It's impacted every single part of our lives. That's why it's so important that Jesus will come back and make the world new. There will be, can you imagine a world that's stripped of all of the brokenness, all of those evil, all of those things completely gone? There'll be no more cancer, no more like brokenness. Can you imagine a world like that? That is a world that will come, that will happen, that he will do. Not yet though. It's not yet right now. So I want to lay that foundation, really important, okay, about that. Now, when we've gone from brokenness to wholeness, from giving our lives to God, how can we practically live that out? Okay, so if you've given your life to Jesus, raise your hand and tell me, have you ever, never, ever sinned after that? Raise your, no, Sam, you didn't, okay? You just lied, so that's not true. Like, even us who've given our lives to Jesus, there's no way you could never not sin. But Paul has two really important principles for us for today. Let's go to Romans 6, verse 12 to 13. He says this, do not let brokenness, evil, darkness control the way you live. Do not let any part of your body become an instrument of evil. Instead, give yourself completely to God. Now, a lot of people talk about like, well, how am I supposed to live for God? It's kind of like super out there. Like, I don't know how to live for God. How do I know God is there? How do I like, it's hard to understand. Guys, it's not actually that hard. Do you know the first place you're called like to live for God? It's in your physical body. It's in your body. It's really, really easy. Like, we make it so much more abstract than we need to. Sin and brokenness is much more physical and practical than you think. Let me give you an example. Okay, so there's a story in like the 14th century, Belgium. Okay, where's Belgium? Europe. Okay, good. So this was like way long ago. There were two brothers who were fighting to be dukes of their like land. And the younger brother, well, the older brother's name was Reynold, but they used to call him the nickname Crassus, which in Latin means fat, because he was so obese. Like, he was so obese. Okay, that's the older brother. The younger brother, I think his name was Edward. Okay, so eventually Edward led this revolt against his brother and took over like the kingdom, the dukedom. Okay, and instead of killing his brother though, here's what he did. He, put his brother in the castle and he built a room around him with a door that was not locked. And he told him, you are a free person. So you could leave through this door whenever you want. Whenever you want. So what do you think he did? Now the thing is, he built the door smaller than his body circumference, because he was so obese he couldn't fit through a normal sized door. And so he told him, you're free, you can leave whenever you want. But he would send up all of these really delicious foods up to his room to feed him. And all he had to do was not eat those things or diet and trim down or whatever, right? To be free. But he couldn't say no to his appetite. And so do you know how long he stayed in that unlocked room that he could have just, trimmed down and left through? 10 years. He stayed there 10 years until his brother died in battle and the people broke that room down and got him out. 10 years. Now that story is a really, really perfect illustration of what it's like to be a Christian. Guys, Jesus sets you forever free from the cross, with the cross. All of your brokenness, you are free. You can walk in freedom anytime you want. But oftentimes, we keep eating up that brokenness in our lives. We can't stop that process. And so we can't live in freedom, even though we are technically free. Okay, lift up your hands. Okay, snap your fingers. Who's a loud snap? No? Oh, that's pretty loud. Okay, snap your fingers. Okay, blink your eyes 3 times, really big. Okay. Wiggle your ears. Who can do that? I can't do that. No? Okay. All right, just kidding. Don't do that. Open your mouth. Take a big yawn in your mask. Big yawn in your mask. Okay. Take your fist. Make it like this. Fist, fist, fist. One fist. Okay. That's the size of your heart, apparently. Okay, look at, that's your heart. Okay, right there. Put your fists together, like this. That's the size of your brain. Okay, actually, if you put them together like this, that's like left brain, right brain, okay? So these are the parts of your body that you and I are called to give to God. That's like the most foundational important thing. Like, sin is not some esoteric, like, devil, angel chasing after you all day. Y'all, every one of us makes a dozen decisions a day about whether we live in brokenness or not, just by what you do with your body. What you see, what you hear, what you say, what you think, how you feel, those are the ways you and I are called to live for God. That's it. It's not like, oh, I don't hear God's voice. Actually, like, push all that aside. Okay, what do you do in your daily life? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you say? That will tell you if you're living like and realizing that God is real or not. Because what you see, what you hear shapes your thought, impacts what you say, impacts your whole life. I've told you guys this a billion times, right? But that is the most important principle. You guys know a lot of people talk about like church and Christians being super hypocritical. Do you know why? Okay, all of these things, these are the things that we don't know how to control. And so we say we're a Christian, but we cannot control these things. We cannot put these things and put it before God. We think that, oh, I'll just come for an hour on Sunday and like sit my butt down here and like soak it all in and be super Christian, and the rest of my week I can do however I want. Or like, you know, my QT for like 10 minutes in the morning, I'll give God that time, and the rest of the time is mine. Guys, we are not meant to be compartmentalized. God did not make you so that only parts of you can serve God. In the West, in our American culture, we've compartmentalized a lot. We separate everything all the time. We like nice little boxes for everything. But how many of you know, like, when you are stressed, your body feels it. Like, when you're thinking, like, really depressing thoughts, like, your body feels it. Like, all of our thoughts, mind, emotions, everything connects together. That's why God says, love me with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength, all of your mind. Because he knows the way he made us, we can't separate those things from each other. You can't. The minute you try to separate and only give God certain parts of your life, you're already setting yourself up for failure. It's not going to work. It will not work for very long, because that's not the way he made you. He made you an all or nothing kind of creature. It's either all of yourself is given to God, or all of it's not. That's it. And yes, there will be times that you fail, but like knowing that concept, like, okay, let me just give all of my heart, all of my mind, every part of my body. That's what I have to give to God. Guys, don't like approach Christianity like, okay, I gotta like do all these things and like I gotta hear God's voice. Okay, no, that will come later. First, get these things in order. Yeah? How you talk to your family, how you talk to your sibling, your mom, your dad, your husband, your wife. Like, that is the most important place you can do ministry. That is the most important place you're called to be a Christian, is in those areas, with those people who see you the most. How do you talk to them? What do you think about them? That's how you become a Christian, is there. Not what you look like at church. It's not. God wants us to love him with all of our hearts, all of our mind, all of our soul, all of our strength. So how can we overcome that pattern? There's two examples that Paul gives us. In verse 14, it says this: sin is no longer your master. Instead, you live under the freedom of God's grace. In verse 16, it says this: don't you realize that you become the slave of whoever you choose to obey? Verse 16, you can be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God. Now, all of you guys have heard about Juneteenth, right? That was really big this year. I think for the first time, it was like a national holiday for the first time this year. Juneteenth, what day is that? What day is Juneteenth? June 19th, okay? That's why it's called Juneteenth. Okay, so what is Juneteenth celebrating? The history is that in April of 1865, the Civil War ended, okay? Which meant everybody was free. But in Texas, in a certain part of Texas, there were African American slaves who didn't know what had happened. Like they didn't hear, they weren't told. And so there were rumors that like we're free, like the government said it was free. And so they would ask and like try to figure out, but their old slave masters would say, no, you're not free. You're not free. And so they still kept them in slavery until the government or armies or whatever it was came months later and said, no, you're all set free. You've been free since April. That's the whole history behind it. And that is a really perfect illustration of what it's like to be a Christian. When we give our lives to Jesus, you are legally set free. You are legally set free. And yet many times we're unsure and we're uncertain about that truth. So we choose to keep believing the lies. What are those lies? You're never good enough. Like that sin, that thought, you're not a Christian. You're just going to keep falling away into sin. Like, oh no, you can't be like that. You aren't good enough. These are the lies that if we listen to them, they will bind us and put us back into brokenness, when in reality, you have been set free. Repeat after me. I am free. Okay, louder. I am free. You have to live that truth out. You are free when you give your life to Jesus. That is where you start. You don't start with like, oh, but I don't know, maybe I didn't, or maybe like God's not powerful enough, or maybe what. The starting point is you have been set free. And so when that temptation comes, or when that brokenness happens, or whatever it is, you look it in the face and you say, I am free. No, I say no to that. I say no to that. I'm not going to let that enslave me again. What is Paul's second illustration? In Romans 7, he talks about marriage and remarriage. So marriage is a contract. It's a legal contract, right? And a sacred contract of when I'm married to my husband, can either of us remarry while we're still married? No, that's called polygamy, which in some places in the world they do that, but that's not what you should do, okay? Now, if I die or my husband dies, can the other person eventually get remarried? Yeah, legally we can. Why? Because death ends all contracts. Death ends any binding contract. If you're dead, no one can hold you to the contract, right? It's the exact same way with sin and God, with brokenness and freedom. In verse 4, it says this: you died to the power of sin, of brokenness, when you die with Christ. And now you're united with him and raised from the dead because we died to sin and are no longer captive to its power. Now we can serve God. In the same way, it's like when you went from this, remember from last week, to this, when you died on the cross with Jesus, you're dead. Your old self in the world, spiritual world is literally dead. And so you can be reborn. That's how that process works. That's what it's like to actually give your life to Jesus. You die with him and are raised to life with him. So when death happens, that contract with sin, that pattern of brokenness, that legal right over you is broken. So guys, that old self in you is broken. I want you to remember that. That's your starting place as a Christian. It's not, oh, I'm not good enough, or this is too hard. That's not the starting point. The starting point is, I am free. When I give my life to Jesus, it's a clean slate. It's a new beginning. I am dead, the old self, and the new self is alive. That's where you start. And you say, okay, I'm not going to give these things, my body, to sin again. I'm not going to. I can't. Because if you walk your body into brokenness again, guess what walks with you? Your mind, your soul, your emotions, because we are one. You guys cannot separate your bodies. You can't think that you do something with your body and then your mind is not affected or your heart is not affected. It all touches each other. Do you see that? So Paul is saying the first place, your line of defense when you're living in this world is watch your body. Watch what you do with your mouth, what you say, with your eyes and your ears, what you put in, what you think, all of those things. Watch that place first. That's your first line of defense. Because if you know you're wandering back into brokenness, then your whole body is taking your whole soul and your whole spirit with you into that brokenness again. Does that make sense? Now, as believers, like I said earlier, who here has given your life to Jesus and you never sin again? Nobody. Okay? Nobody. Every day, I'm always tempted back into brokenness. Every day. I wake up and something pisses me off, and I'm tempted to go back into brokenness. You know what I mean? Like, every day we are surrounded by choices that can lead us back into brokenness. Even Paul, look in verse 18. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible because it's so true. He says, I know that nothing good, even though I know all these things about I am free, he's the one preaching this. He was like, I know it, but here's the thing. I want to do what's right, but I can't. I want to do what's good, but I don't. I don't want to do what's wrong, but I do it anyway. This is like one of my favorite verses because it's so true, right? Like anytime C.S. Lewis says in his famous quote, no man knows how bad he is until he tries to do good. That's when you realize how bad you are. Like, whenever you try to do good, whenever you try to live for God, it's so hard to do, right? But if you want to, don't want to do these things that are not good for you, it's, so easy to do. It's like junk food. So bad. Like, all those fries, all those things, I know it's not good for me. I know what it does to my body. I know that oil saturated in that potato is going straight to my butt. I know that, okay? But, it tastes so good. Right? It's so easy for us to do things that are not good for us. But what does Paul say at the end of this chapter? I love it. He says this in verse 24. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who's going to set me free from this pattern of my life? The answer is in Jesus. It's not in us. Remember, all the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. Nothing you and I ever do can put us back together. The only answer is outside of ourselves. When you think of sin or brokenness or living for God, do you think of a list of rules? Or it's like a burden? Or do you see it as a relationship? If you see God as a taskmaster, you won't live for God very long. Because that's a really exhausting and soul-sucking way to live. And that's not what God wants for you either. But if you see God as your friend, as your heavenly Father, if you have a relationship with him, then you see sin differently. Because you realize that when you go back into brokenness with your body, with your lives, with your heart, with your thoughts, do you know what you're doing? You're breaking his heart. When you see it that way, it changes the game. Can I have the praise team come up? God set you free so you could have relationship with him. God set you free to be his son, to be his daughter, to be his friend. God didn't set you free to give you a list of rules. God set you free because he wants to love you. When you realize I'm a friend of God, when you realize I'm a child of God, sin is no longer about breaking rules. It's about breaking someone's heart. See, the answer to truly living for God is two things. Yes, you have to first know those principles I talked about. You have to know that you're legally set free. You don't have to go back into sin. But knowing is not enough. Remember, we're integrated beings. You can know this here, but that doesn't mean it affects us here. You have to know this here, but you have to understand in your heart that living this new life is about having a relationship with God. Can we all stand? In the chorus of the song we're going to sing after this, it talks about, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I'm not a slave to sin. I'm not a slave to brokenness. I'm not a slave to the old way I used to live. I'm no longer a slave. But what does it say? Does the chorus say, I'm no longer a slave so I can follow all these rules to live for God? I'm no longer a slave to sin, so I'm going to be so burdened to live for God. Is that what the chorus says? No, it says, I'm no longer a slave to fear, to sin, to brokenness, because why? I am a child of God. Guys, He didn't set us free to do all these things. He set us free to be His child. And as we sing this song, I want you to declare that over your life. Say, I am free because I'm His child. Can we sing this together?